Where
The name of your person and your name and go. Ready, set, go.
Jesse Louis Jackson, and I am Kyle Below. Jackson was born in Greenville, South Carolina. He had graduated from North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University and attended the Chicago Theological Seminary, leaving in 1996 to work in the civil rights movement. Jesse, 1941, is an African-American civil rights activist, political leader, and Baptist minister. Jackson also led efforts to register more black voters and to increase representation of minority groups at the 1984 and 1988 Democratic Nation Conversation. From 1971 to 1996, he was director of Operation Red Basket, the economic arm of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. In Chicago in 1971, Jackson founded People United. United to Save Humanity push, an organization devoted to gaining economic power for blacks. In November 1999, Jackson led protests against a school district Decatur, Illinois. The district had expelled 6 African American high school students for 2 years for illegally starting a fight during a football game. The end.
Frederick Douglass. I was born Fred Bailey. My mother was a slave for Captain Aaron Anthony in Maryland. My grandmother took care of me until I was 7. I only saw my mother once in a while when she came back from the fields. When I was 7, I had to go to the great farmhouse and stay there. I had odd jobs to do, such as run errands, carry messages, weed gardens, and help feed some of the animals. I always was hungry and never had enough to eat. The older kids always seemed to get most of the food. 2 people were kind to me, Miss Lucretia and Master Daniel. I dared not complain about how hungry I was, because a slave was often punished severely if he complained about the way he was treated. I'd always listen carefully to Master Daniel because I liked the way he talked. When I was by myself, I practiced talking the same way. I had only one piece of clothing and no shoes. At night, I didn't even have a blanket because only the adult slaves had them. I had to curl up into an old bag in order to keep warm. One day, Miss Lucretia gave me good news. I was being sent to Baltimore to work for Mr. Hugh Auld as a house servant. In Baltimore, my job was to take care of little Tommy. Tommy's mother, Miss Sophia, was very nice to me. When Tommy had his lessons, Miss Sophia let me sit in on them too. I learned my alphabet, several words, and enjoyed listening to Bible stories. I was allowed to wander around Baltimore when little Tommy was asleep or out with his parents. I found odd jobs to do in my spare time. Unfortunately, one day Master Hugh Auld discovered me writing words for Miss Sophia. He said it was against the law to teach a slave to read and write. He said knowing how to read will make a slave unhappy and he would want to be free. This made me more determined to learn how to read and write. I used every opportunity and asked my white friends on the streets about lessons. I practiced writing on board fences, brick walls, and on pavement using chalk or charcoal. I would try using a newspaper whenever I could. Then, when I was about 15 years old, I was ordered back to St. Michael's, and my life in Baltimore was over. In St. Michael's, I worked as a field hand. Farm work didn't come easy to me, and I was slow at it. I worked under a man named Edward Covey, who was a slave breaker. I got into some trouble with Covey and ended up running away. But I came back, and while I was busy working in the stables, Covey crept up behind me and slammed me down to the floor. I got back up, and Covey started pounding me with his fists. I avoided the rope he was trying to tie me up with. He pounded me with his fists, and I dodged and raised my arms to protect myself. I grabbed his shoulders, and I shook him. Covey had fear across his face. He called for another man, and he came. I held the other man off too and gave him a strong kick, and he staggered away in pain. Covey finally had to give up. I had fought back, and I had won. I was no longer a boy. I felt like a man. In 1836, I was sent back to Baltimore to Hugh Auld, and this time I was to learn the trade of caulking ships. I became an expert ship caulker and was earning good wages. I had to pay Mr. Hugh Auld a sum of money at the end of the week, but was able to save a small sum. I had made a vow to myself to be free someday and was hoping to follow it. Now I had met a free Negro girl named Anna Marie, who I had wanted to marry. Now is the time for freedom. On Monday, September 3rd, I escaped. I went to New York City, and from there I traveled to New Bedford, Massachusetts. Anna met me there in New York and we were married. There I decided it wasn't safe to keep using my real name, so I changed it to Frederick Douglass. In New Bedford, I had trouble finding work at my trade, but I would do work of any kind. I started subscribing to the Liberator newspaper and totally supported its young editor, William Lloyd Garrison. I began attending abolitionist meetings and entered into the lively discussions. I was asked to speak for the first time to an audience about my life as a slave at an anti-slavery convention. I was a success and was offered a job as a lecturer with an anti-slavery group. I began to travel around speaking again and again about slavery. Many times people were unfriendly and angry because they don't believe in the anti-slavery group. I also wrote a book about my life. I went to England on a lecture tour. People there were very kind to me. But now my family had grown. I had 4 children, and my trip to England had made me very famous. I decided to write a newspaper so I could reach more people. People liked my paper. Another little girl was born into my family. I continued lecturing to raise money to keep my family and my newspaper going. I also wrote another book about my life. I became one of the agents of the Underground Railroad, and my home was one of their stations. During the Civil War, I continued writing and speaking about slavery. Finally, Abraham Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation that would free slaves. We were overjoyed. I worked hard to get Negro men to enlist in the Army to help fight in the Civil War. I met with President Abraham Lincoln several times during the war to discuss slavery issues. After the war, I went back to writing and lecturing so that all people would give every people full rights as citizens. Negroes needed the right to vote. So, in 1870, two constitutional amendments were added. The 14th one made Negro citizens, and 15th made Negro citizens, and the 15th gave them the right to vote. In 1877, President Hayes appointed me United States Marshal of the District of Columbia. Then President Garfield made me Recorder of Deeds for the district. Now I didn't need to depend on lecturetures for a living. President Harrison offered me the post of Minister to the Republic of Haiti, which I held for 2 years. On February 20th, 1895, I suffered a sudden fatal heart attack while talking with my wife. But I went on and became a great orator, writer, statesman, and leader. I was nearly 78 years old when I died. The end.
You want on?
Okay.
There's the president.
Well, as you can see, it's Jackie Robinson. On April 15th, 1949, Jackie Robinson became the first black man to play Major League Baseball. He was 27 years old at this time. Jackie was born in 1919 and grew up in Pasadena, California. His family was very poor, but he still went on and attended the college at UCLA. In World War II, Jackie became an officer of an all-black unit in the Army. He was one of the first black officers. On October 25th, 1945, Branch Rickey signed a contract with Jackie, but Jackie went to the minor leagues first. When Jackie got back from the minors, there was trouble right from the start. 2 teams went on strike, but the league president was tough and threatened to throw him out of the league if they would not play. For 10 years, Jackie played for Dodgers. He was in 6 World Series. His career batting average was .311. He was voted MVP in 1949. In 1962, Jackie was elected into the Hall of Fame. This was another first. He died in 1972 from diabetes complications. Little did he know that if he wouldn't have died, both of his legs would have been amputated, which means cut off.
Malcolm was born in Omaha, Nebraska on May 19, 1925, when whites were very prejudiced. Earl Little, Malcolm's father, came to the North for a better life. He had 3 kids but left them behind and moved to Montreal, Canada. There he met Malcolm's mother, Louise, a native of the Caribbean island of Grenada. They moved to Philadelphia. He was a Baptist minister. Earl treated whites with respect. Then they moved to Omaha. They left after Malcolm was born. Then they moved to Milwaukee and then to Lansing. Earl again left another family, Malcolm. Then that night he was found injured and died. He was ran over by a car. They had got the warning when police came by and they heard their mother screaming all of that he was dead. He was 6 years old.
When his dad got killed, when Malcolm X was 6 years old.
After Earl's death, she was forced to live on welfare. By 1934, they were desperate. They had nothing to eat. His white skin was a result of his mother being raped. He said he hated every drop of white blood in him. Something his mother even had to pick dandelions and boiled them in a pot. Malcolm was suspended from school for having bad behavior. Then permanently suspended from school. Then moved with a family named Gobahana. Louise went mental and was moved and was in Kela. It's but for 26 years, then was released in 1965. He told his teacher he wanted to be a lawyer. He said to be a carpenter because a lawyer was not realistic for a nigger. And Make was the first to be questioned. In a stolen item. He wanted even blank by Mason blacks. Then whites. He was a hustler and participated in gambling, booting, and prostitution. Then was caught and sent to prison. He was a pusher, an addict, pimp, and gambler, armed robber, and burglar. Malcolm married. While he was in prison, he started to think. He became one of the greatest blacks that speak. When he went to another country and joined the Muslims and fought free and independent race, for a free and independent race. And that he did. But a lot of people thought he meant violence when he said, do whatever needs necessary. Unlike Martin Luther King Jr., he said, respect and pray. Okay, brothers and sisters. Sisters. Okay. Well, is there a mother? Anybody want to be a mother?
I
Better hurry up, you're running.
Okay.
3 to 4 minutes.
Come on, mother.
I'll be your mother.
Just why are you? Why are you going to another country?
Why are you going
Okay,
to
mother going mental. She was going mental. And brothers fighting and playing. Sisters